the globe, killing us all. It wasn't just in the news. It was also in suspense novels. It was also in movies. It was something that was being talked about and feared broadly. It was in the culture. Then there was an Ebola outbreak in Central Africa. Ebola is a horrible disease, and it killed about 250 people under rather horrible circumstances. The Western media descended on it with bull feed. Then it played out as the outbreaks usually do, and the Western media left, and we forgot about it. A couple of years later, civil war breaks out in the very same regions, 3 million dead, virtually no coverage in the Western media whatsoever. Why not? Because it didn't fit any existing Western storyline. It didn't fit any Western self-interest. It didn't feel like a threat to us, and so we didn't pay any attention. So you have this spectacular disparity between an enormous amount of attention given to an outbreak that killed 250 people versus a civil war that killed millions and was virtually ignored. The media follow established narratives. Once there is a storyline, an arc, arcing through the media like to pick up on it and continue with it. Terrorism is a great demonstration of the power of the media narrative to shape how the media portrays events. In 1995, Timothy McVeigh, who was a white, anti-government, right-wing radical, detonates a terrible bomb in Oklahoma City, killing many people, and that becomes the paradigm of terrorism. The terrorism story, the terrorism narrative throughout the late 1990s is that of militias, of angry right-wingers, of anti-government radicals. Well, then, of course, 9/11 happens. Now the narrative, of course, is it's Islamic radicals. That's what terrorism is. And, of course, we all then rush out and go looking for facts and figures that support and advance that media narrative. Well, in 2005, in Oklahoma City, of all places, a man named Joel Henry Hinrichs detonates himself outside a football stadium. Well, this is a suicide bombing in Oklahoma City, and it was not reported around the world. If Joel Henry Hinrichs had blown himself up in the late 1990s, that absolutely would have been widely reported. He not only would have been national news, he would have been international news, and everybody around the planet would have known his name. But his name was Joel Henry Hinrichs. It wasn't Muhammad. He didn't fit the narrative, and so he was ignored.
Every news network in the world got just what it wanted for Christmas this year. Something new to be scared of, specifically underwear.
The drama began on Christmas Day when a man wearing the world's least amusing pair of novelty underpants boarded a plane bound for Detroit. As it descended for landing, he tried to detonate something by injecting a syringe into his thigh, a bit like Pete Doherty.
Luckily for the other passengers and his nuts, it didn't work.
The news obediently sprang into action and speedily descended on Detroit Airport like a load of planes or something. Exterior cameras recorded endless thrilling scenes of the plane grounded behind chicken wire and mountaineers scaling the boarding steps, while indoors, reporters scrambled around trying to find interesting eyewitnesses to interview.
ITN found a woman who described his behaviour in terms which sounded a bit like a review of every Keanu Reeves performance ever.
It was completely unemotional. There was absolutely just a blank face. There was no recognition of anything occurring. When you looked at him, it just seemed as if he wasn't there, emotionally.
America's Fox 2 dispatched possibly the world's most histrionic reporter to stand around on the scene being outraged.
Quite frankly, the details are chilling, and it's very scary to think what could have happened to so many innocent people if his plan to kill would have worked.
It's almost as horrifying to think how melodramatic you'd be if it had.
How did this happen? How did this man beat security? How is a man that is on a do-not-fly list able to get on a plane?
Well, I don't know, shouty hat. You're the journalist. Go and find out.
To be fair, Shrieky Guts was right. There were many unanswered questions about the perpetrator.
The first being, how do you pronounce his name?
Fox made an early bid for Abdul Mudalla.
The man, the menace, 23-year-old Abdul Mudalla of Nigeria.
But his name quickly grew to be both longer and a more daunting auto-cue challenge than that.
Terror suspect Umar Abdul Muttalib.
They've added an Umar to the front of his name.
It was just hours ago that Umar Farooq Abdul Muttalib had...
Oh, and she's just added a Farouk. I hope they've got an expert they could call on to help them deal with pronouncing all these exotic-sounding names.
Nigerian journalist Kemi Omololu Olunloyo joins us. Kemi, tell me what you can about this man.
Before long, Captain allegedly Thunderpants was being profiled as though he was the subject of an E! True Life Stories special.
How did Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalab get so close to blowing up an airliner?
And what can we tell from browsing through his Facebook photos? Was he always into leaves? How much did he pay for this woolly hat?
One of the main things the news wanted to know is where he'd been radicalised, as though a change in your belief system is something you somehow catch instantly in one location, like a stomach bug.
Reporters diligently tracked down his past friends and mentors to ask whether he'd ever done anything to suggest he might one day try to blast his bollocks apart on a plane.
Mike Rimmer taught him history in West Africa and says he seemed supportive of the Taliban in class discussions.
Umar actually thought that their ideas were the correct interpretation of Islam. But I thought maybe, you know, in the class discussions, maybe he was just sort of plain devil's advocate to sort of keep the discussion going.
Oh, right, well, maybe this whole thing's just a big icebreaker.
We also got to look around the street where Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalab grew up.
The Abdul Muttalab family asked us not to film their house, and we respected their wish.
That's quite considerate of the BBC. I wonder if ITN will be similarly respectful.
Outside the home where the man who tried to blow up Flight 253 grew up.
Still, ITN didn't just film his parents' home, they also filmed their second home.
Omar Farouk's father and other members of the family are now at their second home in Abuja, another large and sprawling house with a domed mosque in the grounds.
What are you going to do next? Show us his primary school?
Farouk attended the Essence International School for his primary education. Even at this young age, he rarely mingled.
Perhaps most intrusive of all, we also got to peer at his underwear, which, to be honest, looked considerably cleaner than I was expecting. The unusual methodology was another gift for the news because it meant it could fill hours debating the proposed changes to airline security, complete with saucy footage of the much-vaunted full-body scanner.
The body scanner's raunchiness seemed to vary depending on whose footage you were watching.
For instance, in this stimulating sequence it looked downright titillating, whereas at other times it'd only be arousing if you were into chubby blue ghost porn.
Mind you, sometimes the body scanner didn't look sophisticated at all.
More like a Fisher-Price Cyberman detector.
Anyway, back to the suspect and his other great gift to the news networks, making Yemen interesting.
Most veteran current affairs junkies already knew Yemen was likely to be the next front in the war on terror, but those are hardcore news fans.
If you think of Yemen as an indie band, then the Pants Bomber story marks the moment where it had a breakthrough hit and went mainstream.
A lot of people are suddenly learning about Yemen for the first time.
The news now had an attention-grabbing narrative hook to get the casual viewer interested in the previously boring land of Yemen, a nation apparently twinned with the film Life of Brian. It reacted by running urgent info-packed mini-seminars on this newfound threat as though the viewer was the president in an episode of 24 receiving a critical security briefing.
It was almost as if the entire Yemeni nation had been wished into being overnight.
The news had a whole new land of fear and chaos. Jihadistan, Afghanistan too, Al-Qaeda on sea. Thing is, Yemen wasn't just new to many viewers, but many reporters too.
Across the way, they're selling portraits of Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein's good. His voice.
Without much footage of their own from outside the capital, news networks relied heavily on images uploaded by Al-Qaeda themselves, and this can ramp up the fear factor considerably, as Al Jazeera soberly pointed out.
Most intelligence officials say there were only a few hundred active members in Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, so these videos act as almost like a force multiplier. They allow the group to portray itself as being much larger and much more influential than it actually is. So they're happy to get these images out there.
In short, it looks like 2010 might be Yemen's year in the spotlight.
It's the next big chapter in the news' favourite ongoing horror story. Don't have nightmares.
Obviously, there's nothing funny whatsoever about a man trying to blow up a plane, but there might be something poetic in it. Here's award-winning poet and shambles Tim Key.
The bad gentleman put some powder in his knickers and shuffled through security. Once in his seat, the bad gentleman watched a film. It was the one about Edith Piaf. Not a bad film. But he couldn't really get into it because it had subtitles and because he kept on thinking about the fact that he had to blow his dick up. Then he speculated how angry the gaffer would be if he came home without an exploded plane load of Westerners. In the end, he made a half-hearted attempt to make